In 3, 2, 1. The vulnerable woman who had no choice but to get an abortion is going to be expelled from her community forever. We think that this should not be a trade-off to take, even if we take the best case and say that we can have discourse on the side of government. Very proud to oppose this motion. Before going on to my argument, we support a world where the information will not be leaked. And two pieces of refutation against the government side. They talked about how the anti-abortionists are stopping doctors from doing their normal business. Two things against this. One, we say that this is exactly the why we shouldn't leak the information, right? And secondly, we think that it is worse on their side of the house because all doctors in conservative communities will receive backlash, right? We think that there's going to be more destroying of these abortion clinics because the information is going to be leaked, because it gives them a reason and an opportunity for them to start attacking these doctors more. We think that we need to stop this information and stop the business from being attacked. Now, going on to my 2 points, I'll first talk about principle and second practical. Now, first point is leaking information would seriously damage the woman at the point where the trade-off of discourse should not be taken. So let's analyze the motion. It says unwanted pregnancy, right? So this clearly doesn't mean that the woman is going to have a child between two lovers. No, we think that this means that the woman probably was, for example, too young to financially take care of the child. But we think that taking into consideration that most people know what happens, we think that most of these women, the woman is very likely to have been raped or have had unwanted contact with another person, and that's why they're having an abortion. Especially this is because they're from a pro-life advocate. They are a pro-life advocate, right? We think this exactly means that it's going to be the last resort. Abortion will be the last resort because it goes against what they've been told their whole life. And there's always a danger of knowing by going to an abortion clinic, right? So what will happen when the information is leaked? We think that this woman is going to be expelled, right? They're going to be labeled as simple. They literally lose their family that they've been depending on their whole lives. We think that they'll receive social pressure. They wouldn't be able to have jobs in the community because people in that group are going to know that they went against the church and God. We think that this is not enough reason to push for discourse. Note that this woman did not have this choice to join this, right? They were born into this community, and we think that it is not free choice, that they were not allowed to do abortions, right? This is exactly why we need to protect this woman from being expelled, from being labeled as simple by protecting her information. This destroying of the woman's life is not worth the discourse that the government can provide even on their best case. So why is this important? We think 2 reasons. One, there are a doctor. This person that we're debating about is a doctor before a pro-choice advocate, right? We think that means the responsibility is to serve the people in need. According to the client confidentiality policy, we think that these people have to prioritize their job before thinking about their choice and things like that. For example, lawyers, right? They have to protect people even if they've committed a crime, right? We think that the same goes for doctors. They need to think about their information. They need to protect their information, right? We think that is why it's just not justified for the doctor to leak this information. Second, we think that the client is vulnerable, right? They have no skills, they have no other place to turn to, and that's why they came to the doctor. We think that's why the doctor should prioritize protecting the woman. Now, going on to my second point, which is leaking information and undermines pro-choice. So what is the context of the status quo? We think that the context of the status quo is that it's very sensitive, right? Because it used to be republic, but now it's a democratic country in America. And we think that right now it's a tipping point. The conflict is very likely to happen right now because of this movement from pro-life people to pro-choice people. We think that means we need to be strategic when thinking about releasing information on abortion because it's a sensitive topic. We think that 2 things happen on their side of the house. 1, swing voters vote towards Republic. Why is this true? Let's analyze the spectrum. Okay, there are a certain group of pro-life people and then pro-choice people. But the majority of the people are in the middle. The majority are swing voters, and they're open-minded. They'll vote based on what they look at the news and what the status quo is like, right? We think that when this information is leaked, the pro-choice people are going to be attacked. Why? Because leaking information is unprofessional. The doctor who's who's pro-choice is going to be attacked by swing voters because it's like immoral, because it's unprofessional. We think this means that swing voters are more likely to vote towards the Republicans, and we think that this should be prevented. Secondly, we think that the Republican is going to criticize women, right? We think that this example, this leaking of information, will give the legitimacy for top people in these conservative Christians to indoctrinate and to oppress these women even more. We think this means that women will be watched. Women in conservative communities will be watched all the time because they're going to be because people are scared that they're going to abort, right? Secondly, we think that clinics are going to be destroyed, as I've already told you, because these people are mad towards these doctors for performing these things. We think that women will be further oppressed on their side of the house. And note that these women are not the free choice. They've been born into that community, and that's exactly why they can't perform abortion. We think that this is why we need to protect these women. Yes?
So this person isn't someone who just so happens to be the daughter, for example, of a pro-life advocate. This is an active person who has made her breathing mission to make it harder for people to acquire abortions. So if you agree that these people will be destabilized, then why is that okay compared to the doctor's interests?
We think that this woman, we need to protect the woman's choice of being in that community, right? Yes, they are an active person, but that's because they were born into that community. We've been keeping on telling you that this woman has been born into that community. It's not their responsibility to take care of this. And also note that they were probably, in most cases, as I've told you, raped or things like that. We think that these women have not been consent to have this baby inside her, right? We think this is why we need to protect their rights before thinking about what you guys talked about. So to conclude, we think that as a pro-choice doctor, we should not leak the information to prevent backlash from swing voters, and also to protect the legitimacy of protecting the information of their clients. We should prioritize the clients. Very proud to oppose.
Opposition takes this debate because at best what government is doing is feeding people who are already pro-choice, whereas the significant downside is that this woman has her life ruined and that women in conservative communities have their access to abortion irrevocably denied. All in all, we say that this has zero positive benefits while having a plethora of negative benefits, therefore very proud to oppose. I'm going to be talking about 4 things in my speech, all rebuttals integrated. Firstly, shortly talking about what is this debate about, bringing it away from it should be about the doctor thing that government keeps talking about. Secondly, I'll be talking about whether the doctor is justified in taking this decision. Thirdly, talking about the impact to women in conservative communities, and finally comparing impacts. So firstly, shortly, what is this debate about? We don't think this debate is just about the interest of the doctor and their business propositions, right? We think as the doctor is a pro-choice person, we think it also widely extends to what is good for the pro-choice movement and the rights of women. I think that this is, that government tried to evade this by talking about how it's irrelevant to talk about the right of conservative women as a whole. However, we think that's incredibly relevant in this debate. As long as we're talking about how the pro-choice movement should expand in the future, I think talking about those kinds of arguments is impactful as well, even if it's not explicitly tied to the business propositions of the doctor. With that said, I'm going to be talking about, secondly, about whether the doctor is justified in taking this decision. Now, Hitoha gave you a clear analysis about how even if the best case happens, about we have more discourse, we still think that medical confidentiality should be protected. She gave you several analyses. Firstly, there's the disproportionate harm to the activist herself, who's probably incredibly desperate for an abortion and who's going to have her life ruined by this leak. Secondly, we gave you that doctors have a specific duty to protect confidentiality as a result of the privilege afforded by their license. Now, Prime Minister gave us a bizarre case about how the doctor has a right to protect their business, whereas people who are anti-abortion are standing outside their clinics and harming their business. I have 3 responses to this. Firstly, it's very unclear how this leak is going to protect their business in any way. If anything, I think it's going to lead to more backlash, because here I'd also like to engage with the idea that Prime Minister gave that there's going to be no backlash because it's anonymous, because that was just logically false. We think there is actually going to be a huge amount of backlash from pro-life communities. There's going to be the backlash against the doctor and also the medical community as a whole, because if they're giving things like CT scans, it's going to be clear that a pro-choice doctor leaked this information, and as that's illegal, there's going to be a huge backlash against the unprofessionalism of the doctor and the politicization of abortion by these pro-choice communities. Secondly, there's the backlash against abortion itself, because the media narrative in these conservative communities is going to be overwhelmingly anti-abortion. What this looks like is there's going to be more protests against these clinics, more people standing outside Planned Parenthood, more anti-abortion discourse in conservative media. All in all, we say that the doctor is not protecting their business in any way. They're just digging a deeper hole for themselves. Secondly, I think it was principally unfounded, because the idea that people have a right to protect their business only exists within the lines of healthy competition, right? But leaking patient info is illegal. It's not just like simply publishing articles or writing ads. It's something that fundamentally goes against the duty of the doctor. So we think that is a principally unfounded thing that they have to do more to justify. But thirdly, I think that even if the doctor has the right to protect their business, that should be deprioritized behind the rights of the woman that we're talking about in this case. Because as far as we have this motion, I assume that the doctor still has a stable practice where they can practice abortion, even in the current political climate. They have a good income. We think, therefore, the doctor is receiving little harm as opposed to the irrevocable harm that we're completely ruining this woman's life. All in all, we say that the doctor does not have a right to protect their business, but that even if they did, it's not going to work. And that it should not be the main priority in this debate. Now, moving on to my third argument about how this unjustly harms the women in conservative communities. Basically, we think that the access to abortion in conservative communities is going to decrease. How does this happen? This happens because the media narratives in conservative communities that see this leak are going to be overwhelmingly critical of the woman in order to preserve the purity of their ideology. This looks like other pro-life activists saying, like, I will never get an abortion, or like denouncing members of their family who have gotten abortions, right? What are the impacts of this? Firstly, it looks like getting an abortion becoming much physically harder for these women. It looks like conservative husband always attending his wife's doctor's appointments. It looks like women only being allowed to attend certain doctors. It looks like people continually standing outside these doctors so that women can't go inside. Secondly, I think it also looks like a further indoctrination of the woman inside these communities, because when it comes to light that these women are also aware of abortion as a possibility, I think what's going to happen is that the leaders inside these conservative communities are going to take a further effort to make sure to indoctrinate these women, to make that abortion isn't even an option anymore. This looks like, further ideological education from elementary schools about how it's fundamentally murderous to step inside an abortion clinic, right? All in all, we say that getting abortion for conservative women is going to be much harder once this leak happens. Now, the idea coming from government was that this is fine because they deserve it. I have two things to say to this. Firstly, is that the principle of the pro-choice movement, that women have bodily autonomy and that they're victims of patriarchy, we think that perfectly applies to the pro-life activists and people and women in conservative communities as well. But secondly, I like to directly engage with the idea that conservative women are culpable because they are being activists for being pro-life, because we don't think that they're culpable. Actually, being pro-life is analogous to being in a birth lottery, because if you're born in a conservative Christian community in like rural Texas and you're indoctrinated from birth, other ideological options are pretty much invisible, right? Added to the fact that pregnancy itself is often not a woman's choice because it's the result of things like stealthing or rape, the fact that abortion is also a result of external impositions like not having money, we say that these women are not culpable, that they deserve abortions. But what government is doing is irreversibly reducing the access of abortions for conservative women. Now, why is it better under our side when this leak does not happen? We think what happens under our side is pretty much the status quo, right? Is that conservative women are probably conservative, but they do still have abortion as an option due to the fact that the vilification against abortion has not gone that far. As a result, we think under our side, they comparatively get a right to protect themselves. Now, comparing impacts, finally, I'd like to compare impacts and ultimately what each side is trying to achieve. So government is saying that the pointing out this hypocrisy is going to lead to an advancement of the pro-choice causes. But what happens is that people who vilify this woman on the pro-choice bench are already likely to be strongly pro-choice to begin with. So there's very little ideological shift to that, right? Secondly, there's conservative people who are going to vilify this abortion. I've already told you how that reduces the accessibility for abortion in conservative communities, which is at odds with the goals of the pro-choice movement. But thirdly, Hitoha told you about swing voters, which is probably the most changeable, population in this debate. What happens is that these swing voters are probably going to criticize the unprofessionalism of the doctor to achieve these political means. And we think ultimately by seeing the fact that the doctor's leak ruined this woman's life, we think that is going to turn them overwhelmingly anti-pro-choice. As a result, we think all of that goes against the goals of the pro-choice movement to expand the rights of women. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to answer 3 questions in this debate. 1, issue about doctors' rights and duty, which doctor should prioritize at this specific context, even considering the personal interest. Second of all, what will be the impact on individual women? Thirdly, does this polarize pro-choice versus pro-life discourse? First of all, about doctors' rights and priority. Before moving on to argumentations and counter-analysis, two clarifications. First of all, the previous speaker made a false comparative between who is the most vulnerable woman, this particular women versus vast majority of other women who are prevented from accessing abortion. This is a false dichotomy because protecting this specific woman does not generate concrete harm to other women in this context. So we reject that false dichotomy between this specific individual woman versus utility for other women in society. Second of all, what the previous speaker explained is that even if pregnancy is unwanted, pro-choice is commitment and choice. No, because she happened to be born in a conservative area like Texas, I don't think being a pro-choice is necessarily based on free will. That's what we are talking about. They're systematically indoctrinated by conservative community to believe in pro-choice as an ideology. Then she becomes pregnant unwantedly, and that's the context of this debate. I don't think that metric of because you made commitment, you should be responsible for that. It doesn't stand its fight. Based on that, I would like to give 5 rebuttals to the other side of the house. First of all, the Prime Minister's principle is that because these women are, as a member of a community of pro-choice, pro-life movement, they are undermining your business. They did a lot of bad things. So in order to protect your business, the doctors should prioritize his or her own interests. Therefore, serving medical operation is not mandatory. No, it doesn't automatically mean that that specific individual woman happen to interfere with your business. It's a sweeping generalization that all women in the pro-life communities are radical enough to intervene in your business and abortion clinic all the time. So it is very unfair to impose the responsibility of other radical community members upon the specific individual women who are in need. Secondly, this is the case of unwanted pregnancy. That means the rape or sexual harassment happened. This is an exceptional and urgent context. So even in the case of a free will competition, people are choosing to believe in specific ideology, then I think their case doesn't stand. However, we are talking about very specific circumstances in which women become pregnantly unwanted in the desperation of need. In that specific context, I don't think the consideration of other women's interests should not be the reason to reject medical treatment necessary to help this particular woman. Thirdly, the Deputy Prime Minister explained that doctors do not have obligation to serve medical treatment to begin with. No, let me analyze the geographical context of this debate. In this conservative community, the number of abortion clinics is very limited. That means this particular doctor is the only option who provide the necessary protection and service to the clients. This is similar to analogy of lawyers and defendant incident. The nationally appointed lawyer is the only opportunity and avenue for defendant to defend themselves. In this specific circumstance, if you have the ability to operate the necessary service, if you are the only one, you have a duty to provide the service regardless of background of clients. That is why criminally related information of defendants is protected under the gaze of confidentiality. This same principle applies here as well due to this unique circumstance. Fourthly, the Prime Minister explains that serving medical operation discredit doctors. No, the name of doctors will not be disclosed after operation, right? The female clients do not have an incentive to disclose the name of doctor either. I don't think there will be much business harm or economic harm or financial harm to abortion clinic that he is running to begin with. Fifthly, therefore, if we consider the numerous amount of quantitative harm and predicament that she will face in the conservative community, being persecuted and expelled or even anathematized in the community, versus very marginal harm which happened to doctor, we would like to prioritize comparatively significant and tangible harm for female. Therefore, in conclusion, doctors have a duty to serve medical treatment, and that responsibility overrides the right of doctors to defend business, which is very marginal impact in this debate, and which is in the interest of his or her personal interest as well. As long as that doctor is a professional, the exercising the duty means that they are defending the honor and our responsibility. That is better for that person as well. Second of all, about the impact of the individual woman. On the first level, the contention from the other side of the house is a double down effect, right? If this happens, the effects will double down, and that she might change her position and stance in the movement. First of all, it depends on situation. It really depends on individual. Some individual prioritize personal, private life over public attitudes and public advocacy. Some feminist movement choose to get married to traditional men. I think that's a choice of individual. So it's up to you what to prioritize in your life. So double down effect is not really relevant to the debate. Second of all, even if double down effect happens, even if that specific woman changes the advocacy and an attitude, that is good. Because the moderate member of a pro-life movement creates the spaces for negotiable discussion. Like the reason why pro-life and pro-choice are polarized right now and hard for both ends to reach a consensus is because we don't have many moderate members in both community, in both movement. If she, experiences abortion, if she understands the other side of the countervailing view, she becomes a member of moderate community of pro-life and pro-choice movement. I think that's beneficial for discourse as a whole. And Deputy Prime Minister explains that, backlash won't happen because you will never know who will leak. The anonymity fiat exists for proposition bench. Regardless of who leaks, the fact that this kind of leaking happens exasperates Republicans and conservatives to indoctrinate women even further in order to shut out the option of abortion and reproductive rights in general to begin with. The only response from the other side of the house is already happening in the status quo. No, this leaking is specifically important because all the mechanism of the other side of the house is because it is very shocking, it's emotionally appealing. That is why it is a great rhetoric for Republicans and conservatives to legitimize shutting down any medical and reproductive option for vast majority of women in the conservative community. Finally, about the discourse, does this polarize discussion? The context of this debate is very unique, as my leader of opposition explained. That now Biden from Democrats took over the Republican Trump regime right now. The moment is very sensitive. Any radicalization will fragment and polarize discourse right now. Especially this kind of story, which is emotionally appealing, is dangerous because that is to be sensationalized by both ends of the spectrum. Thereby, this fundamentally undermines the discourse of pro-choice and pro-life as a whole. As a personal interest of doctors, as a member of prominent community, doctors should not transgress the boundary and generate disproportionate harm to discourse in a democracy. That is why we oppose. Thank you.
2, 1. As doctors, we want to protect lives. Expelling a woman from her community is not what we should be doing, right? We think that as doctors, we should prioritize professional metrics over moral metrics, right? Because of that, we're very proud to oppose. Now, 3 clash points in my speech. First, which is better for us as doctors? Which is better for us as doctors? So, government side talked about how the doctors have a right to protect business. We've told you that this will just lead to more backlash on their side, more infringement of business on their side of the house. Being attacked as being unprofessional because they leaked information is detrimental to doctors, especially because clients depend on doctors, right? Doubting strong powers will lead to the infringement of business, and we think that it is better on our side of the house where information is not going to be leaked. What did we tell you as opposition? We talked about the medical confidential policy, right? We think that principally the doctors should not be allowed to refrain from telling the information to the whole world. Their side supports a world where corruption of doctors is okay as long as business is as long as they can protect their business, right? We think that it is immoral to do that as a doctor. Second of all, which is better for the woman? This is always from the perspective of the doctor, right? So what did the government side tell you? They talked about how they can profit, the woman profited from anti-abortion, right? We've told you, we've mitigated this harm by saying that there's this birth lottery, right? There are ideas implemented to be radical about pro-life because you live in that community. And even if we take their case and say that they had a choice to push for this really strongly, we think that the woman probably faced stealthing or rape, right? We think that given that circumstance, this woman should be entitled to safely get an abortion without having their information leaked. We told you about how the woman's life is going to be destroyed. A prominent advocate means they depend on that religion very much, right? We think that when they're expelled from that community, they're literally going to lose everything that they have. We think that the doctor needs to think about each client, right? Because they have so much power in getting the information and, for example, giving them a safe abortion, right? We think that because doctors have the power, they should be thinking about each client, in this case, not giving the information. Thirdly, which is better for for the pro-choice movement. Government side talked about how the woman stopped many others from getting an abortion, right? And how past injustices, so like the woman should have her information leaked. We talked about how there's going to be even more pressure, right? There's going to be a witch hunt in the conservative community because this information is leaked, right? Raped women in conservative communities would not be able to get an abortion. It will become impossible for them to safely get an abortion, right? We think that when comparing past injustices with protecting more women, we need to think about giving safe procedures to these conservative women. In our world, at least they can go in secret, right? But if there's one case of the doctor releasing the information of the patient, we think that they're not going to be able to trust the doctor. We need to protect these women, and as a doctor who needs to save lives, we think that they need to prioritize that, right? Especially because abortion is a critical state. You need to do it fast. We think that we need to prioritize this. Lastly, as a pro-choice doctor, we think that the vote for democracy is essential to keeping abortion, to keeping your ideas, right? We think that to protect abortion as a whole country, we need swing voters to vote for pro-choice. We think that this information will put these swing voters in the places of Republicans, and we need to prevent this. And given that this news will have a big ripple effect, we think that instead of pushing the woman away and leaking the information, the doctor should at least protect the patient and protect their side by not releasing the information. Therefore, very proud to oppose. Thank you.